Okay, let's begin with a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we invite your presence here this morning as we begin a new week of studies. We ask that you can continue to help us in understanding these things. We pray for each person searching for truth, and we just ask that as we understand these things, that we can share them with others. We pray that you can correct us of any error and help us in understanding this line of Jacob. Be with us now, we pray, through thy Spirit, in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, good morning, everyone. Again, we have a lot of work set out for us, and I'm going to try to do my best to, if I have time, get these lines drawn out. I have not drawn them out. I've looked at other people's drawings, but there's so many mistakes and how other people draw out, like some of the chronology, that it would take me more work probably to correct their mistakes than it would be to just do it myself, but I haven't had time yet. Now, when we look at this line of Jacob, and I'm going to go over to this chart here briefly. This is not an easy one to look at. It's a very long line, and this is just the chronology that I have of Abram becoming Abraham, and the line of Joseph is in here as well, the line of Jacob. And this is part of this chart. I probably have this chart separate somewhere, where in the study that Stephen was dealing with yesterday, you got these 252 years from the death of Jacob to the conquest of the promised land in 1479. And this is the two periods of 1764 years, which is 7 times 252. So this is this 252 mirror that's created. Here's the 54 years just by themselves, just to illustrate that. And in dealing with this history, this line, this is just basically the chronology of it. We don't really have in this chart, a structure of it. That is, how does this look as a line? Now, I've suggested that there's a progressive destruction of 4. That is, the first generation from Noah is that history that's connected with the Tower of Babel. And then Abraham's the second generation, in this, not literally, but symbolically, Isaac the third, Jacob the fourth. And then there's this period of darkness, and Joseph's is the reform line. And it's, at least that's one way of looking at it. Another way that we looked at it is we looked at that, how did we do that? I'm trying to remember. Well, we tried to look at it just as a reform line itself, rather than a progressive destruction of 4. But I think it makes more sense as a progressive destruction of 4, dealing with the period of darkness as being that period that leads up to the light that comes. So the main reform line is the story of Joseph, is basically the idea that I have, and that would parallel Christ's reform line. And there's when we get to the line of Joseph, we will see why I look at that as a major reform line. It's also the reform line that connects these periods of this period of 764 years. So we'll see how that's all connected to the line of Christ. What we're going to look at today is we're going to focus primarily on the story of Jacob himself. So we're going to go back to the scriptures. Jeff, your mic is on. And we had addressed when we were looking at the line of Isaac, we had addressed, of course, the deception that had happened with Jacob deceiving his father. So then when we look at the line of Jacob, the question was, how do we fit this line of Jacob? How do we fit it in? A period of darkness, the time of the end, those types of things, because it is a personal reform line of Jacob's. And so how did we do that? Anybody remember? Where would we put the time of the end for Jacob? How did we address that? Anybody remember? We threw a few different ideas out there.
We say it was his birth.
Okay, so we have his birth, and then what do we do about his birth? Like, how do we follow then, like formalization, etc.?
Well, you have a prophecy concerning the younger will be, in a sense, exalted. Maybe it's not the right word, but over Esau in some way.
Okay.
And then that comes to pass to a certain extent 77 years later.
Okay. So if we're going to draw that out, how would we describe it? I don't appear to have drawn this out. And maybe I'll draw this on the whiteboard again. We'll just kind of go through this. Okay, so we're going to have Jacob. And we're going to have his birth is the time of the end. So what would be the period of darkness prior to his birth? Because this is really the same period of darkness that we've been addressing with Abraham and Isaac. Okay, it's darkness about the seed, correct? How this is going to be fulfilled. And you're going to have Jacob and Esau. And the elder shall serve the younger, right? So what did you say then is the formalization and the empowerment? Let's get this. I need more. Because remember, he's going to, there's going to be the selling of the birthright. There's going to be the blessing.
The formalization.
Yeah, so the formalization is which? So this is going to be.
Would it not be the pottage
Okay, so you say it's the selling of the pottage is the formalization?
I'm suggesting that, yes.
Okay. So the selling of the birthright. And what would be your reasons for that?
It's confirming an aspect of the prophecy.
Okay. And now usually a formalization also has to do with the formalization of a message. So, so there's a message that's going to then be understood. And this would be empowerment then empowered at the blessing. Is that what you would say?
Yes.
Okay. So then the second angel arrives. What's the second angel's message? How is it related to the first? And we put this as the marriage. Or did we have anything else? Because we know from the blessing of Jacob, he's going to then leave. He's going to go to Laban. There's going to be a period of 7 years. And then he's going to marry Leah and Rachel. And then he's going to work another 7 years. And then there's going to be 6 more years attached to that.
We had discussed Bethel.
Okay, so we have Bethel. And so would Bethel be the arrival of the second angel? Yeah. Yeah, so we have Bethel in there. I forgot about that. So we got Bethel. We got, and this is all about the seed. So what would Bethel have to do with the first angel's message? Because what is given at Bethel? So this is the mighty angel coming down. So we're going to put this as Bethel because that's what we did last time. At least I believe that's what we did. Because there's a divine symbol coming down there. I think that's what we did. I've done lots of different things with this line. So this is going to be Jacob's ladder, right?
Yes.
Okay. So what's being promised there?
Communication between heaven and earth. And would that also not be sanctification of Jacob?
Okay. Okay, well, we'll look at this a little bit more, but we see the divine symbol, of course, Christ. Now, I'm arguing that this is 9/11 and this is 9/11 as well. So why am I saying this? Because we know 9/11 represents the empowerment and the arrival of the second angel. Okay, I'll let you think about that. Now, so what would be the formalization, the empowerment, and then the arrival of the third angel? These are not, what's that?
If the arrival of the second angel is Bethel,
Yeah,
then wouldn't the formalization be the covenant with Laban? Or would it be the marriage?
yeah, so this is where we're gonna have problems. I mean, because we could put the marriage here, the birth of the sons here. We could put different things in there if we just started guessing.
I'm seeing the birth of the sons as the arrival of the third angel's message.
Okay. Yeah, and I would agree with that. So we're gonna put this is the period of the 7 years. They're gonna have. We're just gonna put 12 times 7 here. Just kind of ignore that. And then we're gonna have. This is the covenant with Laban, and this is the marriage. Is that what you're saying? So we could just do this.
Right?
Okay, so that just symbolizes that. Okay. So, and I'll try to get these drawn out. Mondays is a busy day, but I'll try to get them drawn out tomorrow morning. So there's a logic to what we've done here. Now, we're going to have other events in the life of Jacob, but those events in the life of Jacob later have to do with the repeat of the three angels' message. That is, they're connected to the life of Joseph. And why would that be? Why would I say that? Is there a repeat of what we just have written there in the life of Joseph, especially regarding the second angel's message? The 2 periods of 7 years in particular. So Millerite history is repeated in our history. Same thing happens in the story of Joseph. So the story of Joseph is the fourth angel's message. But we can see when we look at the 3 decrees, the fourth angel is not really Nehemiah. That's the first generation. The fourth angel is Christ's line. And the same thing happens in our history. We have a fourth, which is 1863, but we also have the true fourth, which is our history, 9/11. So I think we'll start to see this as we continue to go through these patterns. We'll start to see what it is that we have to recognize in each of these lines and how past lines are connected. Now, I'm also arguing this is a progressive destruction of 4, even though there's reform lines there. That is, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th generations. But they're also reform lines. And this used to bother me when I first noticed this, dealing with the progressive destruction of 4 that we were using in connection with some of these reform lines in later Israelite history, dealing with what was happening with the progressive destruction of 4 from Leviticus 26, but the fact that we actually also had reform lines there. So it troubled me at first because to me, I wanted it nice and clean, a progressive destruction of 4, then a nice clean reform line, and then a progressive destruction of 4. But some of these progressive destructions of 4, at least maybe even all of them, have personal reform lines in the main characters involved. And we'll see this particularly in the history as we deal with literal Israel. Prophets are representing reform lines as well. Did you have a thought there, Stephen? I seen you light up for a second, but
Yeah, my internet went off and then come back on again, so I missed out what you were saying.
oh, okay. I was just talking about the progressive destructions of for and reform lines, that they can be combined. And that used to trouble me. So, okay. So in going back to these scriptures here, so Jacob, when he flees Esau here in chapter 32, this is, remember we would talked about here, I'm just going to go back. I don't think that's where I'm supposed to be. Yeah, okay, I'm way ahead of myself. Okay, so we're going to have Jacob is going to go to Laban, right? So we dealt with that, and we dealt with the marriage here, the deception that went on. So just as Jacob had deceived his father, he's also going to be deceived by Laban. And then all of this interaction between the different handmaids and the birth of these children, which some people see as problematic. And then we're going to have Jacob fleeing from Laban initially. So I guess we have to go through this. Okay, so we go back here. Okay, Genesis 30:25. I guess we have to start somewhere, and this is probably as good a place as any. It came to pass when Rachel had borne Joseph, that Jacob said unto Laban, Send me away, that I may go unto mine own place and to my country. Give me my wives and my children, for whom I have served thee, and let me go, for thou knowest my service which I have done thee. And Laban said unto him, I pray thee, if I have found favor in thine eyes, tarry, for I have learned by experience that the Lord hath blessed me for thy sake. And he said, Appoint me thy wages, and I will give it. And he said unto him, Thou knowest how I served thee, and how thy cattle was with me. For it was little which thou hadst before I came, and it is now increased into a multitude. And the Lord hath blessed thee since my coming. And now when shall I provide for mine own house also? And he said, What shall I give thee? And Jacob said, Thou shalt not give me anything, if thou wilt do this thing for me. I will again keep and feed and keep thy flock. And I will pass through all thy flock today, removing from thence all the speckled and the spotted cattle, and all the brown cattle among the sheep, and the spotted and speckled among the goats. And of such shall be my hire. So shall my righteousness answer for me in time to come, when it shall come for my hire before thy face, every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats, and brown among the sheep, that shall be counted stolen with me. And Laban said, Behold, it might be according to thy word. And he removed that day the he goats that were ring-straked and spotted, and all the she goats that were speckled and spotted, and every one that had some white in it, and all the brown among the sheep, and gave them into the hand of his sons. And he set 3 days' journey betwixt himself and Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flocks. And Jacob took his rods of green poplar and of the hazel and chestnut tree, and pulled white strakes in them, and piled white strakes in them, or pilled white strakes in them, and made the white appear which was in the rods. And he set the rods which he had pilled before the flocks in the gutters and in the watering troughs, when the flocks came to drink, that they should conceive when they came to drink. And the flocks conceived before the rods, and brought forth cattle ring-straked, speckled, and spotted. And Jacob did separate the lambs, and set the faces of the flocks towards the ring-strake, and all the brown of the flock of Laban. And he put his own flocks by themselves, and put them not unto Laban's cattle. And it came to pass, whensoever the stronger cattle did conceive, that Jacob laid the rods before the eyes of the cattle in the gutters, that they might conceive among the rods. And when the cattle were feeble, he put them not in. So the feebler were Laban's, and the stronger Jacob's. And the man increased exceedingly, and had much cattle, and maidservants, and menservants, and camels, and asses. Now, what's happening here? Can somebody describe what this agreement is, and what Jacob is doing, and what it symbolizes?
Jacob is now looking to be paid for the work that he is doing as a shepherd and as a herdsman.
Yeah.
And so what he's saying to Laban is, anything that is speckled, anything that is spotted, become mine, and those that are more, quote, pure in color are yours.
Right. So he's basically taking, calling the flock, so to speak, of Laban's by taking the ones that are less desirable, at least in most people's eyes. Now, is there a symbolism here with these ring strakes, speckled, and spotted? And where would we find this? What does this represent?
Would that be in the story of the wedding where the employees are told to go out into the highways and byways?
Okay. Yeah, and so this is, in a sense, sort of the outcasts. These are the things that aren't, the non-desirables are being chosen. So we're not judging according to appearances, but in some other manner. Now, what about what is these colors? What does ring straked mean? Anybody know? I mean, we just have these words that we don't use very often.
No, a ring sounds like some kind of circle or something.
Yeah, so it's a ring or a stripe, bands, right? So he's going to have ring straked, speckled. So these would be any kind of mark on them, and spotted. So this would be some kind of, like, I think, a bigger mark, or a patch, where the speckled would be just small marks. You have some kind of defect in the coloring in their fur. So does this have any symbolism attached to it?
Yeah, I'm sure it does.
Okay. Okay, Zechariah chapter 6 is one that we can look at.
Speckled and grizzled horses.
Yeah, so there's these horses that we see, and it's going to be, there's the grizzled and bay horses. So these are horses. Now these are going to represent Rome. And why does the grizzled and the bay horses represent Rome? In Zechariah. So these are the chariots, which with the different horses. The fourth chariot, which is Rome, has grizzled and bay horses. It has two different color designations. Grizzled means spotted.
I know Rome had a language that they couldn't understand the language.
Okay. Yeah, so not everybody's familiar with how I interpret Zechariah, because there's four chariots, which is going to be Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, and Rome. But the time of Zechariah is starting in the time of Media, Persia. And so So when it starts, there's these red horses. They're not going to be sent out. That is, it's going to start with the second chariot, the black horses. So that's Medo Persia. And then the white horses represent Greece. And then the grizzled and bay horses represent Rome. And so why is grizzled and bay? Why is there two different colors mentioned to represent Rome?
Pagan and papal?
Yeah, pagan and papal Rome, right? So there's
Two
Yeah.
legs.
okay. Now as far as the symbolism here, if there is a connection, what is it about pagan and papal Rome that we could tie symbolically to this story of Joseph or Jacob here? I know it maybe it's sort of a tenuous connection. Does this have anything to do with lines or prophecy, marks, rings?
Mark of the beast.
Okay, so we could say like the mark of the beast or even the seal of God. When I think of a ring straight or a stripe, I think of a line. And we can look at, when we look at Rome, it's these different lines, especially pagan Rome, the 1260. So I don't know, maybe I'm just kind of stretching things here, but I see some
But
hint or symbolism dealing with the lines and the waymarks.
like the
By-
spots would represent the waymarks or something.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, maybe that's really stretching it, but that's one possibility. Now this thing where he's taking these rods, so he's taking poplar, hazel, and chestnut tree rods. These are branches or sticks, and he's gonna put stripes in them. He pilled white strakes or stripes in them. And this is the other thing. Could we look at these stripes as line upon line?
I would think so.
Okay. So, somebody might think we're stretching it a little bit here. Now he's doing this. Now, why is he doing this? What would this have to do with the color of the animals that are going to be bred? Just because they see these. Okay. Yeah, so Stephen says grizzled is a gray color, could represent the iron of Rome. Yeah. It's gray streaks, gray stripes. So the question here, what's that, Stephen?
Now I'm just thinking the stripes that maybe you could apply that Jacob has, as you say, maybe the right methodology, applying things line upon line.
Yeah.
Is that you thinking?
Yeah. He doesn't fully understand what.
Could it refer to Christ too in Isaiah 53 where it says, by his stripes we are healed?
Yeah. Yeah. So this would represent the everlasting gospel. I mean, it's a very strange story because I'm not sure how putting these stripes in these rods and having the animals breed before them is going to change the color of the animals. So he seems to have some kind of superstitious idea that this is going to do something. So somebody looking at from the outside might, consider it to be numerology or whatever. But he's just doing something that God is leading him to do. Now, let's look at this next part. So chapter 31, this is going to be later, right? So this is going to be when he actually leaves Laban, if I remember correctly. So it says here, and he heard the words of Laban's son, saying, Jacob hath taken away all that was our father's, and of that which was our father's hath he gotten all this glory. And Jacob beheld the countenance of Laban, and behold, it was not toward him as before. And the Lord said unto Jacob, Return unto thy land of thy fathers and to thy kindred, and I will be with thee. And Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to the field unto his flock. And he said unto them, I see your father's countenance, that it is not toward me as before, but the God of my father hath been with me. And ye know that with all my power I have served your father. And your father hath deceived me and changed my wages 10 times, but God suffered him not to hurt me. If he said thus, the speckled shall be thy wages, then all the cattle bear speckled. And if he said thus, the ringstraked shall be thy hire, then bear all the cattle ringstraked. Thus God hath taken away the cattle of your father and given them to me. And it came to pass at the time that the cattle conceived, that I lifted up mine eyes and saw in a dream, and behold, the rams which leaped on the cattle were ringstraked, speckled, and grizzled. And the angel of God spake unto me in a dream, saying, Jacob. And I said, Here am I. And he said, Lift up now thine eyes, and see, all the rams which leap upon the cattle are ringstraked, speckled, and grizzled. For I have seen all that Laban doeth unto thee. And I am the God of Bethel, where thou anointest the pillar, and where thou vowedest a vow unto me. Now arise, get thee out from this land, and return unto the land of thy kindred. And Rachel and Leah answered and said unto him, Is there yet any portion or inheritance for us in our father's house? Are we not counted of him strangers? For he hath sold us, and hath quite devoured also our money. For all the riches which God hath taken from our father, that is ours, and our children's. Now then, whatsoever God hath said unto thee, do. And Jacob rose up and set his sons and his wives upon camels. And he carried away all his cattle and all his goods which he had gotten, the cattle of his getting, which he has gotten in Padan Aram, for to go to Isaac his father in the land of Canaan. And Laban went to shear his sheep, and Rachel had stolen the images that were her father's. And Jacob stole away unawares to Laban the Syrian, in that he had not told him not that he fled. So he's going to leave without telling Laban. So he fled with all that he had, and he rose up and passed over the river, and set his face toward the Mount Gilead. And it was told Laban on the 3rd day that Jacob was fled. So Dwight will probably take note of that. And he took his brethren with him and pursued after him 7 days' journey, and they overtook him in the Mount Gilead. And God came to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night, and said unto him, Take heed that thou speak not to Jacob either good or bad. And Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the mount, and Laban with his brethren pitched in the mount of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, What hast thou done, that thou hast stolen away unawares to me, and carried away my daughters as captives with the sword, taken with the sword? Therefore didst thou flee away secretly, and steal away from me, and didst not tell me, that I might have sent thee away with mirth, and with songs, and with tabret, and with harp, and hast not suffered me to kiss my sons and my daughters, that thou hast now done foolishly in so doing. It is in the power of my hand to do you hurt. But the God of your father spoke unto me yesternight, saying, Take thou heed that thou speak not to Jacob, either good or bad. And now, though thou wouldest needs be gone, because thou sore longest after thy father's house, yet wherefore hast thou stolen my gods? And Jacob answered and said to Laban, Because I was afraid, for I said, Peradventure thou wouldest take by force thy daughters from me. With whomsoever thou foundest thy gods, let him not live. Before our brethren discern thou what is thine with me, and take it to thee. for Jacob knew not that Rachel had stolen them. And Laban went into Jacob's tent, and into Leah's tent, and into the two maidservants' tent, but he found them not. Then went he out of Leah's tent, and entered into Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the images, and put them in the camel's furniture, and sat upon them. And Laban searched all the tent, but found them not. And she said to her father, Let it not displease my lord that I cannot rise up before thee, for the custom of women is upon me. And he searched, but found not the images. And Jacob was wroth, and chode with Laban. And Jacob answered and said to Laban, What is my trespass? What is my sin, that thou hast so hotly pursued after me? Whereas thou hast searched all my stuff, what hast thou found of all thy household stuff? Set it here before my brethren and thy brethren, that they may judge betwixt us both. This 20 years have I been with thee. Thy ewes and thy she-goats have not cast their young, and the rams of thy flock have I not eaten. And that which was torn of beasts I brought not unto thee. I bear the loss of it. Of my hand didst thou require it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. Thus I was in the day, the drought consumed me, and in the frost by night, and my sleep departed from mine eyes. Thus have I been 20 years in thy house. I served thee 14 years for thy 2 daughters, and 6 years for thy cattle. And thou hast changed my wages 10 times. Except the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with me, surely thou hadst sent me away now empty. God has seen mine affliction and the labor of my hands, and rebuked thee yesternight. And Laban answered and said unto Jacob, These daughters are my daughters, and these children are my children, and these cattle are my cattle. And all that thou seest is mine. And what can I do this day unto these my daughters, and unto their children which they have borne? Now therefore come thou, let us make a covenant, I and thou, and let it be for a witness between me and thee. And Jacob took a stone and set it up for a pillar. And Jacob said unto his brethren, Gather stones. And they took stones and made an heap. And they did eat there upon the heap. And Laban called it Jegar Sahadutha, but Jacob called it Gilead. And Laban said, This heap is a witness between me and thee this day. Therefore was the name of it called Gilead. And Mizpah, for he said, The Lord watch between me and thee, when we are absent one from another. Mizpah is like a watch or a tower. If thou shalt afflict my daughters, or if thou shalt take other wives beside my daughters, no man is with us. See, God is witness betwixt me and thee. And Laban said to Jacob, Behold this heap, and behold this pillar, which I have cast betwixt me and thee. The heap be witness, and this pillar be witness, that I will not pass over this heap to thee, and that thou shalt not pass over this heap, and this pillar be unto me for harm. And this pillar unto me for harm. The God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge betwixt us. And Jacob sware by the fear of his father Isaac. Then Jacob offered sacrifice upon the mount, and called his brethren to eat bread. And they did eat bread, and tarried all night in the mount. And early in the morning Laban rose up, and kissed his sons and his daughters, and blessed them. And Laban departed, and returned unto his place. So, there's quite a few things in here. So if we're going to look at it, there's a covenant made again between Laban and Jacob at the end of this period of 20 years. So there's 7, 7, and 6. And we also have here other symbols: 3rd day, 7 days journey. Shouldn't this be on the line somewhere? So in our line, we have it going 7 and 7. So we're going to have the birth of Joseph marking the arrival of the 3rd angel. And so now we have this story that happens after, 6 years later.
But wouldn't Jacob more properly represent our time where the 1st and 2nd angel's messages had to be repeated?
Okay.
I'm looking at this because as you read through this, wasn't there in reality 4 covenants with Laban?
Okay. Okay, can you label the four? So you're going to be dealing with the first covenant, then the marriage covenants.
He makes the covenant for Raquel.
Yeah.
And then because he's given Leah, he agrees to work another 7 years.
Yeah.
The third covenant is for wages.
Yeah.
The fourth covenant is at Gilead.
Okay. Okay, so the question is, why would this make it our history? I mean, it parallels our history. You can agree with that. But
Right.
if we're going to look at a reform line, we're first going to compare the reform line to Millerite history.
But the point, what you're looking at right now with the birth of Jacob, the pottage, and the everything else, wouldn't that the situation with Laban, wouldn't that have to be a type of a repeat of the covenant?
Well, yeah, in a sense, Isaac and Jacob are both repeats of the covenant. So all of these are repeats. I would agree with you there. I'm just saying in the whole structure of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob being the three angels' messages. So
But
Joseph
we've
is the fourth. Yeah.
been speaking for a long time of the priests giving a message then to the Levites.
Okay.
Laban is part of Jacob's family. So the question that I have is, would he not represent the Levites, Jacob representing the priests?
Well, when we look at the priests and Levites, when we look at them in Millerite history, for instance, who's the priests and who's the Levites?
The priests are the Millerites and the Levites are Protestants.
So we had the Protestants were were in the first angel's message, and the Millerites are the ones who are preached to in the second angel's message. And the priests, they would be symbolized by Samuel Snow. Samuel Snow would symbolize the priests, because there's a message being given to this second group that passes the first test. In our history, the priests, they're these things that span the first and second angel's message, but is primarily a development of the second angel's message. So in this story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because what we're going to look at is Jacob is the arrival of the third angel, or is the third angel in that sort of context. In these, if we're taking Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as a reform line, Jacob is the third angel's message. He arrives October 22nd, 1844. And his history is going to represent the history up until the story of Joseph. Joseph is Revelation 18. At least that's how I'm understanding it, if we take it as a reform line. But that's the whole reform line. Within these reform lines, we have Abraham has a personal reform line, Isaac has a personal reform line, and Jacob has a personal reform line. So right now we're looking at Jacob's personal reform line, which is a development of the third angel's message, which is going to lead to the fourth. So if we're doing that, we're not going to be looking for the priests. That is, the priests occur in a certain place within these structures of these reform lines. That is, there is a priest in the reform line addressing Isaac. which we're gonna come back and look at once we look at the story of Joseph. Now, the story of Joseph is the reform line of Christ. And I'm trying to keep it a bit simple, but when we look at Jacob, then he has a reform line, and his reform line is the three angels' message. It's Millerite history, or Adventist history, I guess we should say. And Joseph is going to be the repeat of that. That is, he's going to repeat all of these lines. Does that make sense, or am I being unclear?
Makes
What's that? Stephen, did you say something?
And I interrupted Stephen. I apologize.
Okay, Stephen?
I was just going to say, you have the 2 sevens representing the 2 7 times
Mm-hmm.
with Jacob and Joseph. And so you have that application with the Millerites and the Thor movement.
Yes, that's exactly my point. Yeah. So you see that this is that the story of Jacob represents the arrival of the third angel, but Jacob has a personal reform line as well. And what we can't do is confuse the fact that Jacob's personal reform line is Jacob's reform line. It's not the bigger reform line. It's just an illustration or an expansion of the arrival of the third, which is marked by Jacob. And so we always have a reform line with every waymark. In this case, we have these personal reform lines: Abraham's reform line, Jacob's reform line, and Isaac's reform line. But the reform line from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is the main reform line. That is, there's this structure overall, and Joseph is the fourth. So the 7 times that's attached to Jacob is repeated in the story of Joseph. So does that help people, what Stephen brought up there? Does that help, Dwight? And you also have a comment, Dwight.
No, Stephen's point's correct.
Okay. So I know it gets confusing because we have all these different layers, but we can see right now we're looking at Jacob's reform line. So that's why we're not taking, and even in looking at Jacob's reform line, everything doesn't, just because you're looking at Jacob's reform line, something in Jacob's reform line isn't to be confused with the bigger reform line. That is, he's going to repeat some things that exist in the reform line itself. Just like in Abraham, we have Abraham offering up Isaac in the reform line of Abraham. It's not the same waymark, even though that event occurs in the reform line of Isaac. And the same thing with Jacob. There's things in his reform line that in the reform line of Isaac, like in the reform line of Isaac blessing Jacob, is a different waymark than it is in Jacob's reform line. So these reform lines are intertwined with each other, like wheels within wheels. And what we're trying to do, what the purpose of understanding these lines is, which is what this study is about, is as we examine these lines, we will then be able to distinguish which line we're in. That is, we have a framework to understand how a symbol in one line has one purpose and it has another purpose in another line. Even though that same event occurs, it has application to different lines. Now, chapter 32, this is when Jacob is going to flee. So Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's host." And he called the name of that place Mahanaim. Now, this is just something which maybe for me has personal meaning in that it's something I noticed a long time ago. Now, Mahanaim, we also see this in the Song of Solomon. Right, so this is this word Mechanaim. It's how it would be pronounced. It means double camp or two armies, and it's seen a few places. So just it's mentioned here first in Genesis 32:2. It's also mentioned in Joshua. It's a location, and it's mentioned a few times. It's mentioned in the book of Samuel. And it doesn't show it here, but it's in the Song of Solomon. For some reason, it does. It probably has a different spelling in the Song of Solomon. Now, just I'm going to go back here. So it's in the Song of Solomon 6:13. Return, return, O Shulamite. Shulamite is just the feminine form of the name Solomon. And when we see return, return, what is that? And Stephen cut out, and he's going to come back in again. So what does return? So here in the Song of Solomon, or Song of Songs, chapter 6:13, we have this mention, return, return, O Shulamite. Okay, you got an echo there, Stephen, as you noticed. Okay, return, return, O Shulamite, return. Return, that we may look upon thee. What will we see in the Shulamite? As it were, the company of two armies. Now that word, the reason why it doesn't show up in there is that word two army, company of two armies, is the word Mehanaim. So it doesn't quite show up. The two armies is Mehanaim. So I'm going to just go back here. So why does it say return, return, O Shulamite, return? Return. So what is that telling us? And we know return, return is the second angel's message. But what if it have return, 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 and then return? What is that? How would we interpret that repetition? Return, return, O Shulamite. Actually, Shulamite. Return, return, that we may look upon thee. So there's four returns. First the two returns, then O Shulamite, then a return, and then return. And then we're going to have these two armies, Mehanaim. Anybody have any ideas of what that means? It's kind of interesting too. In the Hebrew, that verse, Song of Solomon 6:13, doesn't exist. It actually shows up as 7 verse 1. by the way. Shuvi, Shuvi, Hashulamit, Shuvi, Shuvi, Vanachezamu. Machim Cholatz, Ba Shulamit, Hamanachim. Anyway, any ideas what this return, O Shulamite, return? How would we interpret that? Somebody must have an idea.
I think it could be referring to the Church of the Last Days, which hopefully will include us.
Okay, but why is return, O
Church
Shulamite,
triumphant.
return? Okay, I don't necessarily disagree, but there's the two armies, Mahanaim,
Third and fourth angels, 3 and 4
Okay.
angels.
How about the 3 and the 4th angel? So we have the 2nd angel, and then we have the 3rd angel, and then we have the 4th angel. Now, who is the Shulamite? The Shulamite.
The end time church, I guess. I mean, Solomon, that's something to do with peace, right?
Well, it's Solomon, right? So Solomon in the Song of Songs depicts himself as the Shulamite, the female. He becomes the woman or the bride, and as the king, he's using himself symbolically. And then the beloved is Christ, and this is God's love towards Solomon. And Solomon, of course, represents the people. So he's using this poetic license in changing himself into a female, representing the bride of Christ. Now, he mentions himself in the poem as well, but sort of as a contrast. That is, it'll talk about Solomon's weddings, but that's in a contrast to the fact that this Shulamite has nothing about her that is attractive. It's the love of the beloved that has made this Shulamite attractive. So this is about God's love for Solomon. This is something where Solomon sees that God loves him in spite of the mistakes that he's made. And it represents the church. So Solomon himself is representing the church. So this return, O Shulamite, return would be the second, it would be the 4 angels, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd angel's message, and the repeat of that history. So if we go back then to the story of Jacob, and we're going to deal with this place, Mahanaim, we're going to see that it's connected to these 2 armies. We have God's host and also the people, right, that Jacob's with. Now, Jacob's going to divide them and send them into 2 camps, which is what Mahanaim means. So he's going to send these messengers back to Esau. Let's just read this. He commanded them, saying, "Thus shall ye speak unto my lord Esau. Thy servant Jacob saith thus, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed there until now. I have oxen and asses, flocks, and men servants and women servants I have sent to tell my lord, that I may find grace in thy sight. And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, We came to thy brother Esau, and also he cometh to meet thee, and 400 men with him. And then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. He divided the people that were with him, and the flocks and the herds, and the camels into 2 bands." Right? So you're going to again see this word that is, it just shows the word here in the dictionary incorrectly. Well, it doesn't show the whole word, but it's actually Mahanaim. So he's going to send them or set them into 2 bands. It's that same word Mahanaim. It's just in a different form. And said, if Esau come to one company and smite it, then the other company which is left shall escape. And Jacob said, O my God of my father Abraham, O God of my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, the Lord which saidst unto me, return unto thy country and to thy kindred, and I will deal with thee. I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies of all the truth which thou hast showed unto thy servant. For with my staff I passed over this Jordan, and now I am become two bands. Deliver me, I pray thee, from the hand of my brother and from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he come and smite me and the mother with the children. And thou saidst, I will surely do thee good, and make thy seed as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. So he's going to take these here. It says 200 she-goats, 20 goats, 200 ewes, 20 rams, 30 milch camels with their colts, 40 kine and 10 bulls, 20 she-asses and 10 foals. And he delivered them into the hand of his servants, every drove by themselves, and said unto his servants, pass over before me and put space betwixt drove and drove. And he commanded the foremost, saying, when Esau my brother meeteth thee and asketh thee, saying, whose art thou, and whither goest thou, and whose are these before thee? Then thou shalt say, they be thy servant Jacob's. It is a present sent unto my lord Esau, and behold, also he is behind us. And so commanded he the second and the third, and all that followed the drove, saying, on this manner shall ye speak unto Esau when ye find him. And say ye moreover, behold, thy servant Jacob is behind us. For he said, I will appease him with the present that goeth before me, and afterward I will see his face. Peradventure he will accept of me. So went the present before him, and himself lodged that night in the company. And he rose up that night and took his 2 wives and his 2 women servants and his 11 sons, and passed over the ford Jabbok. And he took them and sent them over the brook, and sent over that he had. And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. And when one of the things here, how many sons does he have here at this point? Right, we
11.
11. So that means Benjamin is not yet born. Just a note there. Okay, so he's going to send these gifts to Esau ahead of him. He's going to have his family into 2 different groups. And then he's going to be left alone, and he's going to wrestle with Christ. And there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint. And he wrestled with him. And he said, let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. And he said unto him, what is thy name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. And Jacob asked him and said, tell, I pray thee, thy name. And he said, Wherefore is it that thou dost ask after my name? And he blessed him there. And Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. And as he passed over Peniel, the sun rose upon him, and he halted upon his thigh. Therefore the children of Israel eat not the sinew which shrank, which is upon the hollow of the thigh unto this day, because he touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh in the sinew that shrank. Okay, so the story of Jacob wrestling with the angel. Where would we put this on a line? Where have we, because in our line, we just have those 2 7s that end with the arrival of the 3rd angel's message. So,
Well,
yep.
well, this would be the time of Jacob's trouble. It will be
Okay.
after the close of probation.
Okay. So this is the time of Jacob's trouble after the close of probation. So we're going to have here in this history, this for Jacob's personal line. So let's not be confused with Jacob's personal line and the line of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. So Jacob has a personal line that illustrates the third angel's message. And when we look at Jacob's personal line here, it's going to come at this part of it, because Jacob's going to have history that goes on later, but that's going to be connected with Joseph's line. This is Jacob's line itself. So if we're going to go back to Mahanaim, where are we going to place the Sunday law? I guess that's the question. Because if this is a repeat of history and the arrival of the third angel's message is at the end of that 7 years, however we want to look at it, we're going to have this other history, the 6 years in which he has this, he's working for his wages with these, the color of the sheep and the goats. And then he's going to have this covenant that he makes with Laban again. So we have 4 covenants, and those 4 covenants are all tied to these periods of 7 years at the beginning and the end of 7 years, both and beginnings and ends of 7 years, and at this period at the end of 6 years. So what is happening here in this line of Jacob? What would we, if we're going to say this is the time of Jacob's trouble, this is after the close of probation, what is Mahanaim, that place where he divides them into 2 camps? And we have this divine symbol, which is the God's army as well. So there was this suggestion it has to do with the church triumphant as well. Can we say that this is the Sunday law, where Jacob is, that this is leading up to the Sunday law? There's a close of probation, there's time of Jacob's trouble. They're all kind of tied together here in this story. In our history, they're more distinct. Can we see that Mahanaim is the Sunday law? Or can we not?
What do you think about the 2 camps representing the one who takes the mark of the beast and then the one who has the seal of God?
Right. It's the dividing of Leah and Rachel's family, even though, I mean, in the practical sense, they're all, the children of Israel. But just in the symbolism of the Sunday law, it's a division of 2 groups of people. Right?
And Rachel has the false gods.
Yeah. Rachel has the false god. Why did she
So
take
maybe,
them, according to Spirit of Prophecy? Because the Bible doesn't.
she had a, yeah, is it because she has an idolatrous aspect to her? I can't remember what Ellen White says.
Yeah, so she says, he too, talking about Jacob, he saw also that treachery and cruelty growing upon his sons, and that they were forgetting God and allowing infidelity to come into their hearts. He knew that there was a cause for self-condemnation in this matter, and he began to reflect upon his own conduct in allowing his beloved Rachel to conceal his father's gods, which he had stolen, when he should have destroyed at once everything which would lead to infidelity. There were false gods in the camp of Israel, and he had not used prompt means to destroy them. So there is this taking in this history, these false gods. But this is just part of the problem with all of these reform lines, is that people aren't completely reformed. So I don't think we could take this aspect of it and apply it in the line of Jacob itself. But I understand your point. So Rachel does have these false gods with her. But I don't think we should take that into this story when we're dealing with Jacob's line. Just to look at it as a reform line. Because Jacob is victorious. It's about Jacob, not about Rachel, and not about what's going to happen later. Would you agree with me there?
I have a bit of a problem with that. I mean, our reform line, I mean, if we're going to be reformed, we should show where our failings are as well as how we overcame them
Yeah, I agree.
with the help of God, of course.
Right. So, but we know that every single reform line in the past has a failure to it. That is, it's not a complete reform. Otherwise Christ would have returned.
Amen.
Right. So when we're looking at the reform line that we're in, we can't say, well, those gods are going to be brought by Rachel. Now Rachel is the church, and so maybe we could apply it to the church. But here we're taking two camps, Rachel and Leah, and we're saying that they represent two classes of worshipers, even though in this case, Leah's just hated. It's not like she's evil. And in this case, Rachel actually has the false gods with her. So Rachel would be the one that Jacob loved. But we also see that there's another camp, and that is God's army is there as well at Mahanaim. So we have these two camps represented in two different ways. The church triumphant, which is in heaven. And then we also have the church on earth that's going to be divided into two camps. So that's why I'm saying it's the Sunday law. Would we agree that it's the Sunday law? Or would we look for the Sunday law somewhere else? Now, we also know that the time of Jacob's trouble occurs during a Sunday law. That is the Sunday law with the death decree attached to it.
It seems there's no doubt that there was a test that Jacob had to withstand there. He was put to the test.
Yeah. And you see Jacob just in the practical sense. I mean, he's giving these gifts to Esau. He's setting his family into two different camps. He's not just sitting there waiting to see what's going to happen. So there's a practical sense to it. But in that practical sense, there's symbols that happen in his practical acts, symbols that we can apply to the Sunday law. And then when he wrestles with the angel, this is the time of Jacob's trouble. So we know that that's the primary application of it, is when it actually happens to Jacob personally. But in our history, that's going to be after the close of probation when we're tested. Which test we have to pass for history to close up. So we could say, if we're just going to go to the whiteboard then, go back there. So here we have this arrival of the third angel. And that's going to be that history that's when Jacob is going to make that covenant with Laban. But there's going to be a repeat of that history. So if we go from the third angel arrives, We could put this as the time of Jacob's trouble. And this is Mahanaim. Right? Well, maybe we shouldn't even do it this way. When you have the third angel arrives, this is the fourth, just on a personal level in Jacob's line. So we can say this is the second and this is Mahanaim. So this empowerment of the third angel is connected with this history. This then would be the first, second, and third angel's messages repeated. If that makes sense to people. But this is just in the line of Jacob. In the line of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Joseph is going to represent this. And Mahanaim is these two camps, this doubling, which is the second angel's message, which is also the fourth angel's message. So hopefully people can see that these levels exist. Any more thoughts on that? So we're going to have all these other events in Jacob's life, when he goes down into Egypt, the situation with Joseph and his sons, but that's not part of the line of Jacob. When it comes to his personal line is just an expansion of the three angels' message. And it's this aspect of the line, because the period of darkness has to do with the seed. And this is now going to produce these children and the promise to him. He's going to get his name changed. So when it comes to the story of Jacob, does the story of Jacob end when his name is called Israel? Does that line? What's that?
No, it does not end.
Okay, but in the symbolic sense of the name Jacob, does his line end when he gets his name changed to Israel? Because we're dealing with the line of Jacob, and I'm saying the line of Jacob is until he gets his name change.
Symbolically, yes.
Yes. Okay. So you can see why I'm not going to include all the things that happen in the story of Joseph into this personal line of Jacob, because it is about Jacob's reform, and Jacob's reform is complete in the symbolic sense when he's be called Israel. Would we agree with that?
You're making a good point.
Okay. And this is the beginning of literal Israel. And the beginning of literal Israel must begin with the beginning of Jacob being named Israel. And so when we look at the story of Joseph, we can then connect this with the birth of Joseph, but also include in there when Jacob is named Israel, that this is part of this history of the story of Joseph, that the two stories are connected. And Jacob's going to show up in the story of Joseph, but not as part of that line that we just drew. And maybe we could draw a bigger line of Jacob in some way. But to me, the story of Joseph is part of the line of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then Joseph. So Joseph's story isn't part of Jacob's line. It's part of that whole line. And then we can see why the story of Joseph is a repeat of this history. And how we can take Joseph's line, line it up with Christ's line. But then we would see that Christ's line, in the structures of these reform lines, is parallel to our line. Now, we can always say that every reform line is going to be paralleled in our line. But we need to recognize that some lines are major reform lines, and some lines are just reform lines that occur in the waymarks of those larger reform lines. And this gives us a greater understanding of what our reform line is. We know our reform line is a repeat of Millerite history. Millerite history is the reform line that first gives us the template so that we could look back at all other reform lines. And we never get rid of that. We never get rid of the template of Millerite history. We always look at that as the primary reform line. It's the history that we're repeating, but it's the history that gives us that key. Without Millerite history, we would never see these reform lines. Millerite history is extremely important. Now, if you remember back in 2017, Chawatu and what's her name? Beverly?
Kimberly,
Kimberly. They were using Psalm 23, and they were trying to use this as the template for these reform lines. And there was some problems with what they were doing, but there was also some good things about what they were doing in their reform lines, dealing with Psalm 23. And I tried to point out to Chawatu what the problem was with his reform line, but he was very evasive. He was very protective of what he had come up with and his understanding of it. He wasn't really willing to listen to anyone. One is because he thought he was Samuel Snow, and that the movement would just end up following him. So, big mistake people make when they try to take it somehow that personally they're going to be fulfilling this, when we know that Samuel Snow is this movement. There's no person in this movement that's Samuel Snow. And so he was unwilling to look at this, and unfortunately, he ended up leaving the message because of being personally hurt, which again is another big mistake that people make. But going back to the point, the 23rd Psalm is not the template. It's Millerite history. And so everything has to be able to fit into Millerite history. And if you're going to change Millerite history because of some reform line, then you have a problem. Now, the main thing that we never saw about Millerite history that July 18th showed us, and I don't know if it's clear to everyone, I've tried to illustrate it in so many ways, is that we believe that the first, second, and third angels' messages were going to be repeated. That's what we believe, that Millerite history was going to be repeated to the very letter. But Ellen White never says that. She says the parable of the 10 virgins is going to be repeated to the very letter. And she clearly identifies that the parable of the 10 virgins is marked by the going forth of the virgins is the first angel's message, and the tarrying is the second angel's message. And so the third angel's message is not repeated. Now, maybe that's not clear to people, or they may not understand what I mean by that. But when it comes to the template is the first and second angel's messages. The third angel's message arrives, and then the second angel's message is going to be repeated again, right? Because that's Revelation 18. So we can, in a sense, see in these lines this repetition of the third angel's message, because it arrives. But here in the story of Jacob, we actually see the time of Jacob's trouble. So this reform line gives us some more detail that we can then imply, even though we're using Millerite history, we can lay it over top of our history, and we can see that the repeat of history is going to be connected to the completion of the third angel's message, because the first and second angel's messages have to be repeated in order to have a third. You can't have a third without a first and second. But that third angel's message, in the end, is the completion of the work of Christ that he accomplished through his life and upon the cross and by his resurrection. The work that's going to be completed at the end is the character of Christ being perfectly reproduced in his people. And when we talk about the character of Christ, it's higher than any human thought can reach. So how is it possible that a sinful generation is going to reflect Christ's character? What is it that's going to cause that to happen? Because this is the crux of the matter. This is the problem in Adventism, whether it's liberal Adventism or conservative.
I would say a disappointment.
Okay, so there's an experience, right? We have to take up the yoke of Christ. We have to take up our cross daily. Now, for many people, the idea of perfecting Christian character is not eating after 5 o'clock in the afternoon, never snacking, making sure that you dress right, making sure that you have morning, evening, and maybe even noon worship, making sure that you pay a faithful tithe. All of these little things that the Pharisees did, but yet they neglected the weightier matters of the law. Those things themselves could not perfect a character. Not saying they're not important, but they're not a substitute for a Christ-like character. If we're cannibals, it doesn't matter that we strain at a gnat.
Well, they're tools to get the Christ-like character.
Right. So there's something about a Christ-like character that's impossible for man to produce, except in God's method. And the everlasting gospel is a 3-step testing prophetic message that's going to develop and demonstrate 2 classes of worshipers. Understanding these lines and participating in them is the thing that will develop in us this Christ-like character. Even though it seems kind of odd, because we would think, well, what I need to do to develop a Christ-like character is pray more, or I need to eat a certain way, or I need to do a bunch of things, and not in any way diminishing those things. But those things in and of themselves are insufficient. We have to participate with Christ in his work that he's doing in the unfolding of these messages. So that means we have to receive the truth and live the truth. And that's something that's much more difficult than just eating correctly. And again, it's not disparaging the idea of the importance of eating correctly. That's very important. But those things in and of themselves can't perfect a Christian character. And so we've talked about, entering into covenant with God, all these different things, and we don't know what we're talking about. I mean, we don't. I'm not talking about you guys don't, or some other people don't. We don't. We don't fully understand the message that we're studying. But we have to study it nonetheless, because it's going to be connected with our experience. So hopefully that was helpful. And yeah, so Angela mentions enough number of numbers that were used as symbols. So let's close with prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we just again are thankful for the way that you honor your word, your promises, that where 2 or 3 are gathered, that you will be in the midst. And we are thankful, Lord, that you have been able to speak to us and to teach us. Thank you for hearing our prayer, and we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.